do that. We're just talking about the head-on effect to these communities, these shires who own these airports and so on. Someone needs to have a look at them.
Well,
Chair,
sorry, Senator.
Chair, let me just. I'll try and paraphrase what Mr. Pizzullo said to me. He said his responsibility is very clear. He looks at the security aspects. When I talked about the government, how did the government get to a decision-making process where they hadn't considered the effect this would have on communities? And we went down to what the government meant, and he described the situation to me. He said, you'll be sitting around the cabinet table and Home Affairs will put forward their proposition that there needs to be security, and the chair of cabinet will then say, is there anyone else who has a dissenting view? Okay, so that's the point at which there should have been a hand stuck up and someone said there is a problem. And that clearly hasn't happened in this circumstance, because we now know that your department, who is responsible for it, hasn't done the analysis. Yet they are about to start funding airports with taxpayer money to pay for this security equipment. They haven't even bothered to put the regulation before the Parliament. I have foreshadowed that I will move a disallowance on it because, as we're quite rightly seeing, the other side of the story is not being told. Ms Spence, in terms of evidence...
well, and let's not let things linger, because I left something in the air that Mr Kennedy was touching on. There was a lot in that. So you're interested in how we got here. I'm interested in where we're going. I'm interested in what activities may occur over the next 3 to 6 months so that we can go back and report to whoever the impacts of this thing are likely to be the following. So is there some plan? And if there's not, are you, now that we've really brought it strongly to your attention, are you there contemplating what, at the next executive meeting, to raise it and put someone on it?
This has actually been strongly on our radar. We haven't got formal economic modelling, so we might be getting caught in a bit of language here, which is what Ms Spence was referring to earlier. We are aware of the reports of these costs that you're talking about, Senator Patrick, and why I can't go into it, of course, because of cabinet processes and all that. Well, sorry, I can, but I'd have to take.
I'm not after what went on in cabinet.
But what I can say is we provide our advice
this
along the way, which includes the potential impact of the types of things that you're talking about, and then the government does come to a view on the policy. So all I would say to you, Chair and Senator Patrick, is we are very aware of this potential impact. We're watching it very closely.
Yeah, but Mr Kennedy, I'm saying to you, we are at a stage where this can be physically measured. It can be physically measured economically. Forget about the social impacts, they're an extension of the economic measurement. And it won't take a Rhodes Scholar to go, well, if that's what happens at Charleville, or 2 or 3 of the ones that the good senator has, this will have to be passed on to the travelling public. They're already struggling. It'll mean that less people will travel by air and the route will stop. That's all doable now. And that's a very powerful message to go back to whoever you've got to take it back to say, listen, here's a problem. We've measured it. This is what it looks like. This is the whites of its eyes. You need to put your hand a bit deeper in your pocket and, I don't know, subsidise a class of airports that have no prospect whatsoever of amortising and recovering these costs and retaining their services. That's what I want to hear. And I mean, I'm not asking you to tie your leg to that today, because you're not going to, but I'd just like you to hear you say that you'll go away and contemplate that sort of lift in activity from the department. You've only got to look at 2 or 3, and if they're not turning up, if our fears are not realised, just fold the tent.
We will. It's a good...
Well, Charleville's one. What, Whyalla?
Okay, so I'll just read Qantas's evidence. So this is not me saying this is Qantas. In the South, they gave this testimony, in the South Australian market...
And be careful, they're backing away from it
okay.
now after they've given the evidence.
No, that was Rex.
Oh, that was Rex,
That was Rex. Okay. So I'm giving Qantas's undisputed position on this. In the South Australian market, we operate 2-8 Q350-seaters to Port Lincoln, Whyalla and Kangaroo Island. The impost of the additional security charges to the level that you have described, we think would be critical in that it would move us beyond the tipping point of viability and put those services at risk. I don't think you can hear any clearer message from Qantas that if you impose this, it will stop flights into Whyalla, Port Lincoln and Kangaroo Island. And that must be of concern to every government. We heard evidence from a Miss... might have been Miss Langford, or might have been her offsider actually, who said that she's been around and talked to a whole bunch of these airports. So have you actually picked up the phone and talked to some of these airport operators? Have you talked to Qantas? Have you talked to Rex? Have you talked to Virgin?
Senator, I've certainly spoken to the Airport Association who represent those operators, spoken to Rex and have spoken to Qantas. I don't think I've spoken to Virgin specifically on the security issues.
And are they telling you something different to what they're telling this committee?
They've certainly raised their concerns about the impact.
Okay, and so then the question flows, when a concern like that is raised, what do you then go and do? And please don't say, we're listening. What's the action you actually have been taking in response to these concerns as they're being raised? Who have you talked to in your department? Have you gone to the Secretary and said, you know, we've got a significant problem? Have you written to the Minister and said, there's a real problem here? Or is it just listening?
No, we hear these concerns and we do our own analysis and we provide advice to the government.
Okay, what analysis have you done in respect of this particular problem?
Sorry, Senator. As we haven't, as
I'm going to ask you to table it. So if you've done some,
and so we haven't done any economic analysis. I'd have to take on notice whether we've actually done anything more specific than having listened to
To be
them.
clear, because sometimes we're crossing ourselves, we have not got a formal economic model and gone and looked at the economic viability of all of these airports, but we do listen to the concerns, and the Ms Spencer's group has a sense of which airports are most likely to be impacted by these changes. So, but we have, Ms Spencer's absolutely right, we have not engaged any formal economic modelling to say, is it true this airport is no longer viable at this? We have not done that.
okay. So you now know that there are some airports that their viability is questionable. Having known that, what have you done in respect of taking that to government?
Senator, I'd have to take on notice whether we've provided any detailed briefing to the Minister on this. I will follow up with Qantas on the specific examples that they raised on last week, just to break down a little bit more detail how they've got to the conclusions that they've reached, to see what else we can, what further we can extrapolate from the information that they're providing.
How hard will it be for you to ask these airports, however number there are, how hard would it be for you to write them a letter and say, what do you think are going to be the economic impacts on you post the installation of this security? Because I'm certain they've started to do some work about your cost of your wages and blah, 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 blah. How hard would that be? They might have that work done. And then the second, I'm happy to draft this for you and pop it over to the office. And I'm not trying to be funny. The second one is, how are you going to meet that cost? Is it going to be met by ratepayers, or are you going to advertise it over the flights and so on? And then tying that in with the evidence of, and Rex have also issued concerns, and I can give you some more airports that aren't on that list. How hard is it for us to do that, to try and get a sense of the depth and the breadth of this problem, Dr. Kennedy? Because it's real out there, I'm telling you, it's real.
As Ms Spence, Chair, said earlier, we've tended to engage predominantly through the association, but you're correct.
Abandon them. We haven't heard from them. Abandon them. They're not doing their job. And I'm not sure what resources they've got to do the job or what their will is.
And you could just read the submissions to our inquiry.
Yes, we have.
There's plenty of evidence in there that suggests it's problematic. And, you know, for me, I'm just looking, saying, you know, I expect government to look at things from a whole of government perspective, and I get what Mr. Pizzullo is saying. He's looked at it from a security perspective. He's done his job.
You're always pretty good at shutting us down, Mr. Kennedy. I'm just waiting for you to shut us down on this. You can shut us down by telling us that you're going to have a serious think about it through the weekend, and you'll make a decision, and we'll examine you on that decision the next time you're back here. We're not driving you into a corner. We just want this done for these people.
The only I don't think it's correct, Senator, to say we have not done any work on this. Of course, I can take in notice when we provided advice, but we have provided advice on a number of occasions around this issue to government, and then the subsequent decisions are of government. We have not done formal economic modelling, but we have been aware of an economic impost that this will obviously impose on regional airports, and we have included that in our advice to a whole of government process, and we've drawn on the type of submission that you've heard from and then subsequently the government makes its decision to proceed in whichever way it proceeds. Ms Spence did bring to my attention your hearing the other day and the submissions around it, and having seen the elevated concerns particularly, and to be frank, they've been around for some time now, of particular airports, I think it's quite a reasonable ask for you to say to me, is there a small number of airports where this is of real immediate concern, and could you look at those in detail? And I would be happy to do that.
But I'll